Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where sleep doesn't come in one tidy, eight-hour block, and your midnight wake-up call isn't your phone buzzing but your own body telling you, hey, let's go have a chat, eat a hunk of bread and maybe pray about demons. In the Middle Ages, night isn't quiet, neat, or predictable, and you trudging home through a muddy village lane lit only by starlight probably won't survive this if you wander off into the woods. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle into a low, smoky room, ducking beneath rough-hewn beams darkened by years of soot. Sleep here doesn't come all at once, and nobody thinks that's odd. You lie down early, long before midnight, because candles cost money and firewood's not infinite. The sun dips, the chickens roost, and you and everyone else crawl onto a scratchy straw pallet, still wearing most of your clothes because winter doesn't forgive laziness. Your first sleep, the dead sleep, some call it, comes heavy and fast, dropping you into darkness like a stone tossed into a well. When your eyes flutter open a few hours later, it isn't because of nightmares. It's just what happens. This is the watch, a quiet hour or two when you sit up, stoke embers, whisper prayers, maybe share a crust of rye bread with whoever's awake. In towns, you might hear distant dogs barking or the clatter of a night watchman's stick against the cobblestones. In the countryside, it's the wind moaning through the thatch or a cow shifting in its stall on the other side of your wall. Historians still argue whether this biphasic rhythm was universal, but diaries, letters, and manuals from centuries later all hint that waking at midnight felt as natural as breathing. By the dim light of a rush candle, a reed soaked in animal fat that sputters and smells faintly like burned soup, you rub your eyes and glance at your family. Some are still snoring in a heap, while others are up, murmuring about tomorrow's work. If you're wealthier, you might have a separate bedstead with a frame high enough to avoid the worst of the cold drafts. If you're poorer, you're on a pile of straw and rags, maybe with a wooden board against the door to keep the neighbor's pig from wandering in. This midnight break isn't just for stretching or sipping watered ale. Priests encourage you to use it for devotion. No better time to pray than when the world is still and heaven feels closer. You might kneel on the cold floor, your breath clouding in the air, reciting psalms while your stomach growls. Or, if you're less holy, you whisper with your bedfellow about who stole whose firewood last week. There's even time for, well, marital activities, which medieval advice books claim are best undertaken after first sleep. They didn't exactly blush about scheduling romance. The second sleep drifts over you like a heavy cloak. You slide back under, not all at once but gradually, lulled by the distant creak of timbers and the occasional drip of rain leaking through the roof. In wealthier homes, servants might slip in to add logs to the fire while you doze. In poorer huts, you just curl tighter, hopping the coals last until dawn. And when morning finally comes, it's not to an alarm clock, but to church bells, roosters, or your mother shaking your shoulder, because the sun's up and chores wait for no one. You feel oddly rested despite the interruption. In fact, people swear this two-part rhythm leaves them clearer-headed. Physicians of the day, following ancient medical theory, even recommend this segmented pattern as healthier for digestion and the balance of humors. Whether that's true or not, you're living proof tonight. You're awake, alive, and already thinking about breakfast before you've even finished sleeping. Sometimes, though, the night feels longer than it should. You wake and can't drift off again because you're convinced you heard a footstep outside. You huddle closer to your family, reassuring yourself it's only the wind. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's a thief. Either way, you're learning quickly. Medieval sleep isn't a single peaceful stretch. It's an unpredictable landscape of waking, dozing, and listening to every creak like it might be your last. The moon climbs higher, throwing cold light through the unshuttered window. Shadows crawl along the walls, shaped by branches outside. You think about saints and sinners, angels and demons. Because that's what the church teaches you to think about when you're awake at this hour. You whisper a prayer against nightmares and restless spirits. Your neighbor swears that if you wake between first and second sleep, it's because a soul in purgatory wants your prayers. Whether you believe him or not, you mumble a quick "Our Father" just to be safe. Even in manor houses, where beds have feather mattresses and hangings to block drafts, lords and ladies stir in the night. They write letters by candlelight, pace the halls, or call for wine to ease their wakefulness. This isn't insomnia, it's routine. A nobleman's journal might casually note, "After my first sleep I spoke with John the steward concerning the tenants, then returned to my rest." Meanwhile, a farmer's wife just pokes the fire and checks her children's feet to make sure they're not freezing. There's something intimate about this shared midnight world. The village is quiet but not dead. If you look out the door, you might see your neighbor's lantern as he checks on his animals, or hear a soft knock as someone asks for help with a sick child. The darkness feels deeper, the stars brighter, and the thin line between waking and dreaming almost sacred. But as you lie back down, pulling a rough wool blanket over your shoulders, you don't think about philosophy. You just want to sleep again before dawn, because tomorrow there's plowing to do, bread to bake, and no such thing as hitting snooze. You're barely finished with your second sleep when reality comes crashing in, literally, because someone rolls over and elbows you in the ribs. Privacy. Forget it. In this world, beds are less like personal sanctuaries and more like overcrowded waiting rooms for unconsciousness. Whether you're a farmhand, an innkeeper's guest, or even a wandering monk, you almost never sleep alone. Picture it, a single straw mattress the size of a door, jammed into a corner of a smoky hut. You, your spouse, 2 children, and possibly a visiting cousin or passing traveler, all bundled up together like firewood stacked for the winter. If you're in an inn, the concept of private room doesn't exist unless you're absurdly rich. Guests just line up on pallets, side by side, boots off, daggers close to hand, not to fight off assassins, but to keep someone from stealing your shoes while you snore. Even nobles aren't immune to this communal coziness. Royal bedchambers often contain not just the lord and lady, but servants sleeping on the floor nearby. In castles, pages and squires bed down on rushes or benches, always ready to fetch water or ward off intruders. The grand 4-poster beds you imagine from fairy tales. Those draped curtains aren't for romance. They're for warmth and maybe a hint of privacy, while a half-dozen attendants snore on the floor. You roll over and feel something move in the bedding. Not a ghost, worse. Fleas, lice, and the occasional mouse all share the same night quarters. Bedding isn't washed often. Straw mattresses are changed maybe once a year if you're diligent. And that soft, sweet hay smell, it vanishes quickly, replaced by sweat, damp wool, and the unmistakable tang of humanity. You scratch at a bite and mutter a prayer against plague, though no one really understands how disease spreads yet. Historians still argue whether people truly welcome strangers into their beds as casually as some records suggest. Travel guides from the later Middle Ages advise carrying a sturdy belt pouch because your bedmate might borrow your coins while you're dreaming. Yet plenty of tales describe wayfarers being invited to share not just supper, but the family pallet, simply because turning away a traveler in winter could be a death sentence. Hospitality wasn't just kindness, it was survival. So there you are, wedged between a neighbor who snores like a blacksmith's bellows and a child who kicks in his sleep. You learn to keep your arms folded and your purse under your shirt. When someone coughs, you instinctively turn your head, because in an age of weak lungs and no antibiotics, even a common cold could carry you off. In wealthier towns, inns do offer better arrangements, meaning benches or shared bunks stacked against the wall. Some even supply a communal blanket, though it smells like everyone who's ever used it. If you're unlucky enough to find yourself at a crowded roadside tavern, you might sleep sitting up at a table, your head resting on your arms, while the landlord's dog wanders underfoot licking up spilled ale. And yes, dogs sometimes crawl right into bed with people. Extra warmth is extra warmth. By the faint glow of the hearth, you watch a rat scurry along the edge of the room. No one bothers to chase it. Everyone's too tired. The straw rustles as people settle back down, and soon the room hums with breath, snores, and the occasional murmur of a dreamer talking in his sleep. Someone laughs softly in their dreams, which is somehow both comforting and eerie. Oddly enough, these cramped arrangements create strong bonds. Families talk, laugh, and even plot the next day's chores while lying side by side. A village child grows up hearing every adult conversation whispered in the dark, from gossip about the miller's wife to prayers muttered for the sick. And in winter, when frost creeps down the inside of the walls, that shared body heat can mean the difference between waking up alive or not waking at all. Sometimes, though, you long for solitude. Monks might get single cells in monasteries, but even they often share dormitories lined with wooden pallets, rising at midnight when the bell tolls for prayer. Pilgrims on the road huddle together for safety, trading stories under the stars and learning to ignore each other's smells. There's no room for shyness in this world. Personal space hasn't even been invented yet. You close your eyes, trying to ignore the itch of straw against your cheek. Someone turns over, taking half the blanket with them. Another sleeper mumbles something about a stolen chicken. You pull your knees to your chest, making yourself small, and drift off again despite the discomfort. Because in medieval life, exhaustion always wins over luxury. And tomorrow night, you'll do it all again, whether you're in your own hut, a stranger's barn, or a roadside inn where the fleas greet every guest like old friends. You're still scratching at those flea bites when night rolls around again, and this time you're clutching something strange under your blanket, not a dagger or a crust of bread, but a charm. Because in this world, sleeping isn't just about closing your eyes. It's about surviving the unseen. You mutter a quick prayer before lying down, not because it's polite, but because you believe things lurk in darkness. A whispered "God keep me from night spirits" might guard you better than any locked door. The church approves these prayers, but people also cling to older, stranger customs. Some folks hang sprigs of herbs over their beds, rosemary to ward off illness, mugwort to scare away evil dreams. Others put iron nails in the rafters, hopping to repel witches. In certain villages, mothers stitch tiny crosses into their children's nightcaps. Travelers tuck polished stones or carved runes under their pillows. And yes, there's that one neighbor who swears an onion on the windowsill keeps demons out. You roll your eyes, but you still set out the onion, just in case. Historians still argue whether these practices come from deep pagan roots or from desperate attempts to Christianize old fears. Either way, everyone does something to tilt the odds of peaceful sleep in their favor. You lie back, feeling the cool weight of a wooden rosary in your hand. Beside you, someone murmurs a bedtime charm they learned as a child. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, bless the bed that I lie on. Simple words, but they carry real comfort in a time when dreams are considered doorways for wandering spirits. Medieval advice manuals warn against sleeping on your back, lest you invite nightmares, or worse, a demon sitting on your chest. Not all protections are holy. A farmer might nail a horseshoe above the bed, claiming it traps malicious fairies. A shepherd could tie knots in a strip of red cloth and keep it under his pillow, believing the tangles confuse evil spirits. You've even heard of midwives placing wolf teeth or little carved saints under a newborn's cradle to protect it through the night. Your eyes grow heavy as the fire dies down. The air smells of smoke and tallow, with a faint sweetness from the crushed herbs on the windowsill. In the half-light, you see someone spit 3 times over their left shoulder, a gesture against ill fortune, and then curl up to sleep. You do the same, though you're not entirely sure why. It's simply what people do. Sometimes, charms get oddly specific. Sailors sleep with tiny bits of blessed wax sewn into their caps to keep storms from haunting their dreams. Soldiers tuck relics, maybe just a scrap of cloth said to touch a saint, under their bedding to guard against nighttime attack. And if you're unlucky enough to have night terrors, the village healer might recommend carving strange symbols into your bedpost or even burning incense made of juniper, while chanting verses to drive out whatever rides you at night. Are these things superstition? Maybe. But when you live in a world of sickness, sudden death, and little medical understanding, you try everything. Historians still puzzle over how much people really believed these charms worked versus how much they did them out of habit, like how we knock on wood today. You hear a rooster crow prematurely outside, and it makes you think of another curious warning. Never sleep with your feet pointing toward a door. People whisper that it's the way corpses are carried from a house, and doing so invites bad luck or death. You shift in bed just enough to make sure your toes aim safely at the wall. The fire pops, casting fleeting shadows across the room. Your fingers curl around the talisman under your blanket. You tell yourself it's just a carved bit of wood, but part of you hopes it's more. And as you finally slip towards sleep, you remember what an old monk once said. The devil walks at midnight, but he fears a heart that prays. Still, you keep that onion nearby. Prayers are good, but onions don't. The hour grows late, and you're bone tired, but sleep in the medieval world is never truly silent or still. Tonight you're reminded that beds are not tucked away in quiet suburban cul-de-sacs. They're jammed inside living spaces thick with the scents and sounds of survival. You stretch out on a pallet stuffed with straw, listening to the muffled snorts of livestock just beyond the wall. If you're a peasant, your cow or goat probably sleeps inside with you, sharing the same air. It's not sentimentality, it's heating. A living cow is basically a big furry stove, and you're grateful for every degree of warmth it gives off. The problem: cows snore, chickens mutter in their sleep, pigs grunt and shuffle. And then there's your brother coughing on the other side of the room, your father grinding his teeth, and your little sister kicking you in the ribs. In towns, the noise changes but never disappears. You might hear clattering wagon wheels echoing through cobblestone streets, dogs barking at night watchmen calling the hours, or drunken revelers staggering out of taverns. Even in a castle where stone walls muffle outside sound, you have servants whispering nearby, doors creaking, and sometimes wind howling through drafty halls. The smell is its own problem. A hearth keeps you warm, but the smoke doesn't always go out the roof. It pools under the rafters, leaving you coughing or blinking against the sting. Rushes on the floor absorb everything: ale spills, sweat, food scraps, and when they're finally replaced, the smell can be worse than before. Bedding rarely gets washed, so the scent of tallow candles, sour straw, and humanity blends into a pungent perfume you can never escape. And speaking of candles, they aren't just for light. They're alarms. A guttering flame alerts you to a draft or an intruder. Wealthier households leave a candle burning low all night, watching the way it flickers to see if doors or windows have been opened. In humbler cottages, you don't dare waste good wax. Instead, you use a rushlight, basically a reed dipped in fat that burns smoky and foul but cheap. If you wake at night, you can just about see to grab a drink or step outside without tripping over someone. Historians still argue whether people became used to this noisy, smoky chaos, or whether they simply endured it because there was no alternative. Either way, your body adjusts. You fall asleep despite the racket, like sailors who nod off with waves pounding their ships. You even learn to wake up at certain sounds, like the stealthy footstep of someone trying to lift your purse, but ignore others, like your uncle snoring louder than the bell tower. Sometimes you wish for quiet, but in this world, too much quiet can be terrifying. A silent night might mean wolves prowling nearby, or worse, that something unnatural is afoot. So you take comfort in the chorus of farm animals, family members, and creaking beams. At least it means life is still going on around you. A candle pops, sending up a curl of smoke. You roll over and catch the faint glow on the wall. Your neighbor swears candlelight can scare away evil spirits since they hate fire, but it's also a double-edged sword. A careless flame can burn down a thatched roof faster than you can shout, "Fetch water." Many towns even have rules against leaving lights burning after certain hours to avoid catastrophic fires. The stench grows thicker as the night wears on. A wet dog wanders in through the door someone forgot to bar. You wrinkle your nose but don't move. You're too tired, and besides, the dog will curl up at your feet and keep you warm. Somewhere in the darkness, a child whimpers in a dream. A woman gets up to stoke the hearth and trips over someone sleeping on the floor. The whole room groans, but nobody actually wakes fully. It's just the rhythm of night. If you're rich enough to afford a private chamber, you're not necessarily better off. Thick bed hangings block out drafts, yes, but they also trap smells, and the chamber pots you keep nearby add to the mix. The sweet perfume of lavender sachets barely masks it. Nobles sometimes keep a servant awake all night to tend the fire, turn the mattress, and fetch wine if they wake up thirsty. Imagine sleeping while someone else just sits quietly in the corner, waiting for you to stir. Comfort has its own kind of strangeness. You sigh and pull the blanket tighter. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters. Inside, the smell of smoke and sweat clings to everything. And yet you're already halfway asleep, because the human body can learn to rest anywhere, even with the barnyard practically in bed with you. The night presses close, heavy with smoke and straw dust, but sleep doesn't just carry you away, it shows you things. Dreams are not idle flickers of imagination in this world. They're messages, warnings, or glimpses of something beyond, and you treat them with the same nervous respect you'd give to a passing noble with a very sharp sword. You wake between first and second sleep, heart pounding, breath shallow, clutching at the rough wool blanket. You've just dreamed of a dark figure at the door and you wonder, was it just your mind or some spirit wandering by? People around you treat dreams as serious business. The old woman in your village says if you dream of water, someone will die. A monk says the same dream means divine cleansing. Historians still argue whether dreams were seen as truly prophetic or just convenient tools for moral lessons. But you, lying there in the cold, aren't debating. You're scared. Medieval dream books circulate among the educated. These thick volumes try to decode every image. Dream of gold, good fortune. Dream of wolves, treachery. Dream of bread. You're probably just hungry, but someone will insist it's a sign of God's favor. Even kings consult these guides, and priests sometimes warn people not to take dreams too seriously because the devil can disguise himself as an angel in your sleep. It doesn't help that nights are full of whispered fears. People talk of night hags or witches' rides, where a sleeper feels crushed by an unseen weight, what we now call sleep paralysis. You roll over, trying to convince yourself it's only bad straw or stale ale causing these visions, but part of you believes that if you forget to pray, something really could sit on your chest and steal your breath. Your neighbor wakes too, muttering about hearing hoofbeats outside at midnight, though no horseman should be riding at this hour. Another swears he saw pale lights drifting near the edge of the village, spirits of the restless dead. Are these just tricks of tired eyes? Maybe. But you clutch your wooden rosary tighter and decide you'd rather not find out. Some say certain foods affect dreams. Cheese brings nightmares, wine brings prophecy. Others swear that if you sleep with a sprig of thyme under your pillow, you'll dream of fairies. You try it one night and wake up convinced you saw a crowd of tiny figures dancing in the moonlight. Were they real? You'll never know. But it's enough to make you leave a crust of bread by the door, an offering to keep whatever walks the dark satisfied. And when dawn finally comes, it's a relief. The cock crows, the shadows vanish, and everyone wants to know what you dreamed. You share it cautiously because in this world dreams have weight. They might guide a day's work, warn of danger, or even decide whether a journey goes forward. The line between night and waking is thin, and you live with one foot in each. You stretch, feeling the stiffness in your neck, listening to the household stir awake. A child laughs in her sleep and rolls over. An old man crosses himself and thanks God for another morning. Life goes on, but deep down you know tonight will come again, and with it the strange half-world where spirits whisper, dreams speak, and darkness feels alive. You've learned to live with it because there's no other choice. And now, as you settle back under the covers one last time, the edges of the room blur, your thoughts drift, and the steady hum of the night fades into quiet. The fire glows low, a final orange heartbeat in the dark. Sleep takes you gently, as it has taken generations before you, in 2 long breaths broken by midnight prayers, in crowded beds beneath smoky rafters, with talismans clutched tight and eyes half open for one. The parsonage of Reverend Samuel Parris smells faintly of wood smoke, damp wool, and the faintest hint of panic. though no one will admit it just yet. You're standing near the hearth, watching 9-year-old Betty Paris and her 11-year-old cousin Abigail Williams jerk and twitch as though puppets on invisible strings. One minute they're writhing on the floor, the next they're babbling nonsense or falling into eerie silences that last far too long. You notice how tightly the women of the household grip their aprons, knuckles white as linen in a snowdrift. Even the men, though careful to look stern, have a glimmer of unease in their eyes. In Salem Village, superstition clings like frost to the eaves. Any unexplained ailment draws suspicion. Was it an illness? Perhaps. But this felt different. No fever, no cough, just violent fits. And so the whispers begin. Witchcraft. Someone mutters about Tituba, Reverend Paris's enslaved woman from the Caribbean. They say she told stories of omens and spirits by the fire on long winter nights. Historians still argue whether Tituba truly practiced folk magic or merely entertained restless children with tales of far-off lands. Either way, you see how quickly frightened minds latch onto the idea of dark forces. Day after day, the girls' behavior worsens. They contort their bodies in impossible angles, scream as though bitten by unseen dogs, and complain of pins pricking their skin. You're sitting in the corner trying not to breathe too loudly, because in a place like Salem, the wrong breath at the wrong time can draw the wrong eyes. The minister prays, neighbors crowd into the room to watch, and the girls name names. First, Sarah Good, a poor, grumbling beggar woman with a habit of muttering under her breath. You'd probably mutter too if people slammed doors in your face. Next, Sarah Osborne, sickly and absent from church far too often. And finally Tituba herself, who stands accused with barely a word of protest. The icy roads outside crunch under the feet of villagers bringing food, gossip, and escalating fear to the Paris household. By candlelight, you overhear debates. Is this truly the devil at work? Some insist yes. Others hesitate but stay quiet because disagreement feels dangerous. After all, in a Puritan settlement, sin isn't just personal, it's communal. If one person lets Satan in, the whole village is at risk. And you can't exactly put "had a weird dream" on the prayer request list without someone calling the constable. One evening, you slip into the meeting house to escape the cold. Instead of warmth, you find Reverend Paris thundering from the pulpit about invisible forces and God's wrath. His words crack like frozen branches. We must drive out the evil among us. The congregation nods, their faces pale as unbaked dough. A baby wails in the back, "Smart kid, honestly." Then Tituba confesses. Or does she? You're not sure because her story sounds less like an admission and more like something forced under threat. She speaks of black dogs, red cats, and a tall man in dark clothes promising shiny things if she serves him. She even claims there are witches hiding among the villagers. Whether she's terrified, trying to save herself, or actually believes what she's saying, historians still argue. But one thing is clear: the spark has been struck and the tinder is dry. As snow keeps falling, the fear spreads faster than frost creeping up a window pane. Children mimic the fits, adults eye one another with suspicion, and you start to wonder if simply standing in the wrong place will get you accused. Someone jokes, lightly, that if you sneeze wrong, they'll call you a witch. You laugh too loudly, then immediately regret it. At night, the wind howls through the crooked chimneys, carrying every rumor from house to house. You dream of shadowy figures packing outside, boots sinking deep in the snow. In the morning, you can almost see the prints. The villagers whisper about devils in the woods and strange lights near the edge of the settlement. Is it real, or just fear feeding on itself like a snake eating its tail? Either way, the atmosphere is thick enough to slice with a butter knife, if only you could afford one. The ministers gather with magistrates to decide what must be done. They send for respected elders to pray over the afflicted girls. Nothing helps. Betty, Abigail, and others claim they see spectral figures, ghostly shapes of the accused tormenting them. Even when Sarah Good swears she's innocent, the girls shriek and fall to the floor as if strangled by invisible hands. You feel the room's temperature drop, not because of ghosts, but because everyone believes there might be ghosts. And so the stage is set. The first examinations are ordered, neighbors pack into the meeting house to watch, and every sideways glance now looks like evidence of a pact with the devil. You try to keep your head down, but it's hard not to wonder. If someone points at you tomorrow, what defense could you possibly give? You can't exactly prove you aren't a witch, no more than you can prove you didn't steal the minister's best firewood last winter. Which you totally didn't, probably. The snow outside glows faintly in the moonlight as you trudge home, wondering how a handful of children's strange behavior could unravel an entire village. Your breath fogs the air, and every shadow feels a little too long. In Salem, 1692, safety is an illusion, and even silence can be dangerous. You wake to the sound of heavy boots on packed snow and voices raised in alarm. Word spreads through Salem village like smoke. More names, more accusations, more fear. The girls in the parsonage are no longer the only ones crying out. Other young women and even grown men claim to feel sharp pains, choking hands, and unseen bites. You try to convince yourself it's just cold air, hunger, or sickness. But when an entire crowd swears they see specters hovering in the rafters, doubt slips into your bones like icy water. The magistrates waste no time. You shuffle into the meeting house, now a courtroom, crowded with neighbors whose faces are pale as birch bark. Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba stand before stern men who question them for hours. Sarah Good protests her innocence but curses under her breath when her infant cries from hunger. Bad move. In Puritan New England, a muttered curse is practically a signed confession. Tituba repeats her strange tales of black dogs and shadowy men. The magistrates nod gravely, writing it all down as proof of a vast conspiracy. Whether she's inventing stories to survive or parroting what they want to hear, no one knows. Historians still argue whether her testimony planted the seeds of paranoia or simply reflected the terror already growing in Salem's frozen soil. Soon others fall under suspicion. You hear Martha Corey scold a neighbor for believing in witchcraft, and by morning she's accused of being a witch herself. That's how upside down things have become. Deny the devil and clearly you're in league with him. Meanwhile, Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old grandmother beloved for her piety, is arrested too. You can't help thinking, if even Rebecca Nurse isn't safe, who is? Neighbors who once traded butter and firewood now glare at one another over fence rails. You pass Deacon Ingersoll's tavern and hear heated whispers, people nomming enemies, petty grudges resurfacing like weeds through frozen ground. A missing cow, a boundary dispute, a borrowed pan never returned. Suddenly all these small quarrels look like evidence of witchcraft. At one gathering, the afflicted girls claim to see specters perched on beams above the courtroom. Someone swears a yellow bird rests on a woman's shoulder, invisible to all but them. You almost laugh at the absurdity but stifle it fast. A misplaced smirk could cost you your neck. The judges use a new tool, spectral evidence. If the girls say they see your spirit attacking them, even while you're standing calmly in front of the court, that alone can condemn you. You try to imagine explaining to a stern magistrate that your soul is not sneaking out at night to pinch teenagers. Somehow you doubt they'll believe you. And so the accusations snowball. Giles Corey, an irritable old farmer, scoffs at the whole business and earns himself a trip to jail. Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, these names echo everywhere as more afflicted youths join the chorus. You begin to wonder if fear is contagious like the measles. By candlelight, families huddle in their houses, windows rattling from winter wind. You hear prayers whispered through thin walls, pleas for protection from Satan or from neighbors' lies. And in the silence after those prayers, you hear something worse. The sound of suspicion sinking in, as deep and silent as frost into the earth. Walking home from the meeting house, you picture invisible fingers pointing from every doorway. The air smells of pine smoke and distrust. No one walks alone anymore, and when they do, they walk fast. Even the dogs seem nervous, tails tucked low. Somewhere in the night, an owl hoots. You jump like it's a demon on your shoulder. By spring, the jails are overflowing. Pregnant women, stubborn old farmers, even little girls are locked in cells that smell of damp straw and fear. Some confess to impossible crimes just to save their own lives. Others refuse, praying that truth will prevail. You're not so sure anymore. You watch Reverend Paris preach louder, his words sharper, as though volume alone could drive the devil from Salem. And you wonder, is this really about witches? Or is it about power, grudges, and fear wearing a very convenient mask? Historians still debate whether the trials were fueled by genuine belief in sorcery or by human ambition dressed up in scripture. Standing there in the packed meeting house, you feel the answer might be both. At night, you lie awake under a thin quilt, listening to the wind claw at the shutters. Every creak sounds like footsteps. Every shadow looks like a noose. You remind yourself you've done nothing wrong, but then again, so had Rebecca Nurse. And she's in chains. The pointing fingers grow bolder. The shadows stretch longer, and the line between truth and fear blurs until you can't see. The sun climbs higher now, but the warmth doesn't reach Salem Village. Even in spring, the air feels brittle with tension, as if one loud breath might shatter it. You find yourself walking past the meeting house again, though it no longer feels like a place of worship. It's the courtroom of Oyer and Terminer now, where justice has been dressed up in robes but stripped of reason. The judges, Stoughton, Sewall, Richards, sit high above the crowd, their quills scratching furiously, while the accused stand below like fence posts waiting to be chopped. Cotton Mather, the influential minister from Boston, whispers advice about rooting out the devil. The room reeks of sweat, damp wool, and fear so sharp you can almost taste it. You try to sit still on the hard bench, but the wooden plank creaks as though tattling on you. One after another, villagers are hauled before the court. Bridget Bishop, known for wearing bright clothes and running a tavern, is first to face the gallows. You can't help but notice the irony. In a village that fears fun, a woman with a red bodice is basically a walking accusation. The afflicted girls shriek and collapse as she denies being a witch. The judges nod gravely, as though fainting spells prove sorcery more than starvation or hysteria. Historians still argue whether these performances were sincere or staged. Were the girls truly tormented, or did they simply know how to sway a room full of stern men? Spectral evidence rules the day. You overhear a judge say, "The devil may assume the shape of an innocent person to do mischief." If that's true, you think grimly, then no one is safe, because even the most pious soul could wear the devil's mask without knowing it. It's a legal trapdoor. You're guilty if you confess, and guilty if you don't. The court grows busier with each passing week. Witnesses testify about livestock mysteriously dying, butter curdling, bread refusing to rise, proof, apparently, that Satan moonlights as a very cranky baker. You almost laugh, but then you remember people are hanging for this. Humor feels dangerous now, like walking on thin ice with a noose in your pocket. Martha Corey, who once mocked the accusations, now stands trembling as neighbors claim her specter pinched them. Giles Corey, her husband, scowls at the proceedings, muttering about nonsense, and earns his own place in a cell. Rebecca Nurse's trial cuts deeper. This kindly old woman, known for her prayers and gentle ways, is accused by people she once helped. Even when the jury first returns a verdict of not guilty, the judges send them back to reconsider until they change their minds. You feel the floor tilt under your feet, as though truth itself has been declared a witch. Outside the courtroom, gossip flies like startled crows. Deacon Ingersoll's tavern hums with rumors of hidden covens. Farmers glare over fences, remembering old land disputes. Someone whispers that Ann Putnam's family benefits every time another neighbor is jailed. You wonder if witchcraft is really the devil's work, or just human greed with a Puritan accent. Inside the jail, the accused rot. The cells smell of mildew and unwashed clothes. Shackles leave deep bruises on wrists and ankles. Children are kept with their mothers, their cries echoing down the cold halls. Pregnant women like Elizabeth Proctor cling to the hope that carrying life will keep them from losing their own, at least for a few months. You visit once to bring bread and water and can't shake the memory of eyes staring at you through iron bars, pleading without words. Then come the first executions. You stand among the crowd at Gallows Hill as Bridget Bishop is led to the scaffold. The rope swings in the breeze like a lazy serpent. Ministers pray, the condemned declare innocence, and the crowd murmurs nervously. When the trap is sprung, the body jerks, and the air grows so still you swear even the wind is holding its breath. You taste bile, but you clap with everyone else because in Salem, silence is dangerous. The court grows drunk on its own power. Every new confession fuels the fire. Those who plead guilty and name others are spared, while those who refuse to lie are hanged. The logic is clear. Save yourself by destroying someone else. You watch neighbor turn on neighbor, old grudges rising like ghosts. That missing cow, that fence-line dispute, that borrowed kettle never returned. They all become part of Satan's grand conspiracy. Cotton Mather writes letters urging caution about spectral evidence, but no one listens. Even his father Increase Mather warns that it's better to let 10 witches go free than hang one innocent person. But the court presses on, its hunger for names unending. Night after night you lie awake, staring at the beams of your cold house. Every creak sounds like footsteps. Every whisper of wind sounds like someone calling your name. You dream of ropes, of judges' quills scratching your fate onto paper, of friends pointing at you with trembling fingers. You try to remind yourself that reason will prevail, that the madness must end soon, but dawn only brings more arrests. In the marketplace, you overhear a chilling joke. Best way to clear your name is to accuse your neighbor first. No one laughs too loudly, but you all know it's true. And so the court of Oyer and Terminer rolls forward like a creaking cart, crushing everything in its path. Justice has become theater, and Salem is its unwilling stage. You wake to the sound of a drumbeat rolling through Salem village, deep and steady, like a grim heartbeat for the entire town. Gallows Hill waits. The court has spoken again, and the condemned are marched out under a sky so bright it feels almost mocking. Sunlight glints on the irons at their wrists and ankles, and the smell of pine from the nearby woods drifts faintly on the breeze, strangely peaceful for a place about to become a stage for death. This time it's not just Bridget Bishop. Rebecca Nurse, Sarah Good, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, Sarah Wilds, all sentenced, all insisting on their innocence. You trudge with the crowd to watch, because in Salem, absence is as suspicious as guilt. The hilltop feels crowded with whispers, the kind that make you check over your shoulder even when you're standing in plain daylight. The scaffold looms above you. Ministers read scripture while the rope sways slightly in the wind. Sarah Good's voice rings out sharp as an axe. "You're a liar. I am no more a witch than you are a wizard." She glares at Reverend Noyes and curses him to his face. A chill passes through the crowd. You think about how bold she is, how defiant in her last breath, and you wonder if courage is its own kind of witchcraft. Historians still argue whether the crowd believed every word the court said or simply feared being next. Judging by the pale faces and downcast eyes around you, fear seems the safer bet. You clap when others clap, murmur, "Amen," when the ministers pray, and try not to watch too closely when the trapdoor opens. But the image brands itself into your mind anyway. Feet jerking above the ground, a rope creaking like a slow metronome marking the end of someone's life. By midsummer, the executions pile up. The jail smells worse than ever, sweat, straw, unwashed bodies, and despair. Giles Corey refuses to enter a plea, knowing that doing so would allow the court to seize his farm. The judges order him pressed under heavy stones until he either confesses or dies. You hear the tale in hushed tones. "More weight," he supposedly croaked as his chest cracked under the crushing load. Whether he actually spoke those words or not, historians still debate, but the story spreads like wildfire. It's hard to forget a man refusing to break, even when the stones pile so high you wonder how anyone could breathe. The afflicted girls keep performing in court, shrieking, falling into fits, pointing at invisible shapes only they can see. Some villagers start to whisper doubts. Surely not all these people are witches. Even the governor's own wife is named, and suddenly the court's confidence wavers. Funny how outrage grows fastest when powerful people feel threatened. Still, the hangings continue. John Proctor, Elizabeth's husband, is condemned after speaking out against the madness. "We are only what we always were," you hear him say in a voice steady as oak, "but now they're pointing at us." His calm terrifies you more than the girls screaming. He goes to the scaffold with others, George Burroughs, a former minister, who astonishes the crowd by reciting the Lord's Prayer perfectly before his death. Weren't witches supposed to choke on holy words? For a moment, even the spectators seem to doubt, but the rope does its work anyway. Gallows Hill becomes a place no one wants to pass after dark. The trees sway and groan in the wind like they're trying to tell you something you don't want to hear. You hurry past with your collar turned up, glancing back as though a shadow might be following. Deacon Ingersoll's tavern buzzes with muttered conversations, mugs of cider trembling in nervous hands. People begin to wonder if the devil is really walking among them, or if the devil is just fear wearing a Puritan hat. You hear one farmer say under his breath, "We've hanged more saints than sinners." You nod, but say nothing. In Salem, words can kill as quickly as ropes. Even ministers begin to speak out. Increase Mather warns that it's better to let 10 witches go free than to condemn one innocent soul. But for many already dead, that wisdom comes too late. You walk home through air heavy with regret, past fences where neighbors no longer meet eyes, past doors bolted tight against the night. The court still calls itself holy, still claims to be cleansing the village. But the wind on Gallows Hill says otherwise. It moans through the grass where feet once kicked in empty air. You feel it on your neck and quicken your pace, though you know you can't outrun what's happening here. By autumn, even the bravest begin to murmur. Maybe this has gone too far. Maybe the devil isn't hiding in the woods, but sitting in the courtroom with a quill and seal. And you, trudging through the frostbitten fields, can't help. The leaves turn brittle and fall in soft spirals, but Salem Village feels heavier than ever, as if the weight of every hanging clings to the air. Gallows Hill stands quiet now, but the memory of swaying ropes is etched into every gaze, every step, every whispered conversation that dies when you enter a room. The tide begins to shift, though slowly, like a stubborn river dragging at its own banks. Governor Phipps finally steps in after his own wife is named among the accused. Convenient timing, you think grimly, but you'll take any glimmer of reason you can get. The court of Oyer and Terminer is dissolved. No more spectral evidence, the governor declares. No more convictions based on invisible shapes and teenage shrieks. You feel the first true breath of relief in months, though it catches in your throat. Too many are already gone. The jail doors creak open for many, though not all. Some who confessed remain behind bars until they can pay fees for their own imprisonment, which seems like a special kind of cruelty. You walk past the cells and see hollow faces blinking at the daylight as if unsure whether they still belong in the world. Elizabeth Proctor, spared only because she carried a child, finally steps out with her baby in her arms. The Proctor farm is nearly ruined, but at least she's alive to see it. In the meeting house, Reverend Samuel Parris stumbles over his words. His sermons no longer ring with fire and certainty. Parishioners glare from the pews, no longer afraid to question his judgment. Some even demand his removal. You remember how loud his voice had been last winter, thundering about the devil's plot. Now he mutters prayers about forgiveness, his eyes darting toward the door as if expecting the same rope he helped tighten around others' necks. Historians still debate why the hysteria ended when it did. Was it reason finally winning out? Political pressure from Boston? Simple exhaustion after too much death? You walk the streets and wonder whether the devil ever needed to visit Salem at all. People were doing his work without any help. Neighbors who once pointed fingers now avoid eye contact. The Putnams retreat into their farmhouse, shutters closed tight. Ann Putnam, Jr., years later, will confess she was wrong, that she truly believed what she saw but now grieves for the innocent she accused. But standing here now, in 1692, No apology feels strong enough to wash away the stain. Winter closes in again. The same bitter winds that began this nightmare return, rattling the shutters and hissing through the crooked chimneys. You walk past Gallows Hill at dusk, where frost silvers the grass. It's quiet now. No drums, no crowd, just a few bent trees groaning softly in the wind. You imagine the voices of those who died here whispering through the branches, not angry, just tired. The trials leave scars deeper than any rope burn. Families are broken, farms abandoned, friendships shattered. The colony later votes to clear the names of the condemned, even grants small sums of restitution to heirs. But you know coin cannot buy back a life or silence the memory of creaking wood and swinging bodies. Even years later, the story of Salem lingers. Ministers debate whether the devil truly stalked the village, or whether pride, fear, and hunger did the work all on their own. Historians argue about ergot in the rye, about political feuds and land disputes, about teenage rebellion dressed up as piety. But you don't need theories. You were there. You saw how a village can turn on itself when fear wears the mask of righteousness. And now, with the courts silent and the snow falling soft as ash, you trudge home one last time. The night is still, except for the sigh of the wind against your door. You set down your lantern, pull your thin blanket tight, and listen to the quiet. It's almost too quiet, as if the whole world is holding its breath, unsure whether to weep, pray, or sleep. The lesson of Salem isn't about witches at all. It's about how easily people can lose themselves when fear becomes law, when rumor becomes evidence, when silence becomes guilt. You think about the names, Rebecca Nurse, John Proctor, Giles Corey, and whisper them once softly to make sure they're not forgotten. Now the village grows dark. The hearth fire dims, the night air cools, and even the wind seems gentler, as though Salem itself wants to sleep at last. You trudge along the uneven paving stones of the Via Sacra, dodging carts creaking under the weight of amphorae and slaves carrying baskets of figs. Voices mingle in the warm dusk, senators plotting in whispers as merchants bark over the price of Cilician grain. Somewhere above this racket, the young Fulvia grows up, learning that Rome isn't run on virtue or lofty speeches. It's greased by gold, flattery, and the occasional shove down a marble staircase. She comes from a noble but not overly wealthy family, the Fulvii Bambalians, aristocratic enough to gain entry to Rome's political salons, but not so rich they can afford to sit back. This means every dinner party matters, every alliance counts. You catch her sharp eyes watching the room as wine flows and jokes curdle into insults. Even as a teenager, she's sizing up suitors not by their charm, but by the number of clients who follow them to court in the morning. Her first big move is marrying Publius Clodius Pulcher, the notorious street agitator, the man who once dressed as a woman to infiltrate the sacred rites of the Bona Dea. Historians still argue whether she truly loved him, or just loved the mob he commanded. Quirky tidbit: Clodius used to hand out free bread and bribe voters so openly that you wonder if he just skipped writing receipts altogether. You watch Fulvia learn the ropes as she glides behind him, not just a dutiful wife but a silent strategist. When Clodius struts into the forum flanked by hired thugs, you feel her presence just behind him, ears tuned for every muttered deal. Then comes the first real jolt. Clodius is murdered on the Appian Way, ambushed by Milo's gang. You picture Fulvia standing over his body, not wailing helplessly but calculating. Rome erupts in chaos as she parades his corpse through the streets, riling the crowd into a frenzy. Senators panic, temples burn, and suddenly this grieving widow is no mere spectator. She's directing traffic in the storm. You can almost smell the charred beams of the Senate House when the mob torches it in revenge. It's in this furnace of violence that Fulvia's ambition hardens. She realizes that love may be fleeting in Rome, but power, if you know how to hold it, can last longer than marble. As you wander past graffiti praising Clodius, you hear her name whispered by the same men who claim women should stick to wool spinning. She's not just a wife anymore. She's a player, moving pieces while keeping her own hands clean enough to dine with patricians. By the time she marries Gaius Scribonius Curio, A bold tribune with more charm than good sense. You've seen how quickly she adapts. Curio burns bright and fast, throwing himself into Julius Caesar's camp when civil war looms. Fulvia stands by as alliances shift like tiles in a mosaic. One moment Pompey's supporters cheer in the Forum, the next Caesar's veterans march across the Rubicon. Mainstream fact: Caesar crossing that little river in 49 BCE didn't just spark war. It made every Roman household choose sides, whether they wanted to or not. Fulvia chooses survival, and more than that, she chooses advancement. But Rome is fickle. Curio is dispatched to Africa to fight Caesar's enemies, and you follow Fulvia packing marble halls, waiting for word that never comes. His death leaves her widowed again, wealthier than before and more experienced in the ruthless mathematics of Roman politics. Her eyes no longer shine with naive grief. They glint like coins in a banker's palm. You can feel her next move coming before she even makes it. The Forum is buzzing about a rising star named Mark Antony, Caesar's brash lieutenant who parties as hard as he fights. While historians still argue whether Fulvia married him for love or for leverage, you stroll past dinner couches piled with purple cushions, catching sly looks between them. She laughs at his jokes, 3 goblets deep. They're probably not that funny. But what she really admires is his army at his back and his seat at Caesar's side. In every whispered conversation, every exchange of rings, Fulvia proves herself less a passive wife than an active partner. She's not content to be a footnote in Antony's biography. She's drafting her own. And as you drift through these candlelit rooms, you notice senators lowering their voices when she passes. Rome is waking up to a dangerous truth. In a city that claims women have no public voice, Fulvia somehow speaks louder than most men. You're still wandering through Rome, though now the streets feel heavier, as if the cobblestones themselves have soaked up every rumor, every whispered plot. After Julius Caesar falls beneath the knives of his assassins on the Ides of March, you can feel the entire city trembling like a rope pulled taut between rival hands. Mark Antony strides through this turmoil with the swagger of a man who knows that chaos is his native element. But just behind him, steady as his shadow, is Fulvia. She's no stranger to sudden loss. You've seen her wear mourning veils before, first for Clodius and then for Curio. Both times she used grief as a weapon sharper than any blade. But this time is different. Caesar's death has cracked the Republic wide open, and Antony isn't the only man rushing to scoop up the pieces. Octavian, Caesar's wiry, calculating heir, stalks the same halls, smiling too much, speaking too softly, and somehow gathering soldiers faster than Antony can drain a wine cup. You watch Fulvia study him at banquets, her gaze cool, weighing whether this sickly youth is really a threat or just an annoyance. Historians still argue whether she underestimated him, or if Antony did. Fulvia's marriage to Antony is not a quiet domestic affair. You see her in his camp, listening while soldiers grumble about unpaid wages. She knows how to turn murmurs into loyalty with just the right amount of silver and sympathy. When Antony heads east to raise forces and shake down governors for funds, she stays behind, tending not to hearth and home but to the machinery of Roman politics. Senators try to shame her for meddling, calling her shrill or unfeminine, classic Roman insults. But she doesn't blink. In smoky forums, she's bribing tribunes, arranging street demonstrations, and making sure Antony's enemies wake up to graffiti they'd rather not read. Then comes the turning point. The Senate, swayed by Cicero's poisonous speeches, brands Antony an enemy of the state. You catch snippets of Cicero's Philippics echoing off the marble, Antony as a drunk, a thug, a threat to Roman liberty. Fulvia burns at every word, and here's a quirky tidbit to picture. She's rumored to have pierced Cicero's severed tongue with hairpins after he's killed, not exactly the behavior of someone content to sit in the atrium weaving. Whether the tale is true or just political slander, you can imagine her satisfaction at silencing Rome's sharpest tongue. Antony's fortunes rise and fall like a bark tossed on the Tiber, but Fulvia keeps him steady. When he makes peace with Octavian, sealing the deal by marrying his sister Octavia, you see Fulvia smile through clenched teeth. Antony assures her it's politics, nothing more, but you can practically hear her fingernails digging into her palm. Historians debate whether this marriage was the spark that lit Fulvia's next move, or just the final insult in a long line of them. As you trail her through colonnades buzzing with rumor, Fulvia begins rallying support not just for Antony but for herself. She commands troops in Italy. Yes, a Roman matron commanding legions, or at least directing the generals who do. You pass camps where veterans chant her name, grateful for the donatives she secured for them. Coins minted with Antony's face quietly carry her influence too. When you hold one up in the torchlight, you swear her shadow is stamped alongside his. And then blood again. The streets run hot as Fulvia backs Lucius Antonius, Antony's brother, in open revolt against Octavian. This isn't a drawing room spat anymore. You watch armored men clatter through alleys while Fulvia rides between camps, wrapped in a widow's veil not for mourning but for war. It's the Perusian War, and though her allies eventually falter, you can't help but marvel. In a Rome that claims women can't even vote, Fulvia is besieging cities and dictating terms. Mainstream fact: Perusia, modern Perugia, becomes the battleground. Octavian's forces tighten their grip, starving the city into surrender. You smell the smoke rising from granaries, feel the pangs of hunger in your own belly as you drift past soldiers boiling leather straps for food. Fulvia, miles away, sends messages and plans counterattacks, but Octavian's net is closing. When the revolt collapses, she's blamed for everything. Too ambitious, they sneer, as though ambition were a disease carried only by women. You watch her pack in haste, boarding a ship for Greece to reunite with Antony. The Tiber glints under moonlight as she leaves, not in disgrace, at least not in her own eyes, but in bitter frustration. She had fought Octavian head-on and nearly bent Rome to her will. In one quiet moment on the deck, you see her staring back at Italy, the night wind tugging her veil. Does she regret it? Historians still argue whether she acted on her own or at Antony's command, whether she wanted war or merely miscalculated. You catch only a flicker in her eyes, pride, anger, and something softer, maybe exhaustion. And as you follow her ship sliding into the dark Ionian Sea, you feel it. Fulvia isn't finished yet. Her life has already outpaced that of most Roman matrons, and she's only in mid-stride. But even the sharpest ambition has limits, and somewhere out there, Octavian is waiting with his patient smile, ready to turn her every move against her. You're still with Fulvia as her ship cuts across the Ionian Sea, spray cold on your face, gulls circling overhead. The salt air tastes sharp, like the politics she's leaving behind in Italy. Rome may be hundreds of miles astern, but its whispers travel faster than sails. Even out here, you hear Octavian's voice in the wind, soft and smug, spreading blame for the Perusian War squarely on Fulvia's shoulders. When she reaches Antony in Greece, there's no warm reunion. You watch them meet in a lamplit villa, the air thick with accusation. Antony, nursing his wounded pride, blames her for stirring up a war he claims he didn't authorize. She fires back. Was she supposed to sit in Rome embroidering while Octavian gobbled up his supporters? Their quarrel is quiet at first, then heated. You're careful to stay in the shadows as cups of Falernian wine go untouched, their voices sharp as drawn daggers. Still, Fulvia doesn't crumble. You trail her through bustling harbors where Roman coins clink in merchants' hands. A quirky detail catches your eye. Some of these coins carry Antony's profile, but Fulvia's name or symbols are never far from the purse strings. Historians still argue whether her influence over Rome's mint was direct or simply the byproduct of being Antony's partner, but you see soldiers accepting those coins with cheers. Because pay is pay, no matter whose ambition funds it. Fulvia lingers in Greek cities where Antony's officers mutter about Octavian's treachery. You smell roasted garlic from street stalls as she slips through narrow alleys to private meetings, arranging alliances with governors, promising bonuses to veterans. Her power now is quieter than open revolt, but no less real. You can almost feel her fingers pressing into the soft wax of sealed letters, dispatching messages that keep Antony's network alive while his attention drifts toward the east and toward Cleopatra. Yes, that Cleopatra. You hear her name carried on every breeze from Alexandria, rich with incense and gossip. Fulvia knows Antony is being drawn in, not just by Cleopatra's beauty but by the glitter of Egypt's wealth. A single eyebrow raised over a silver chalice says everything she thinks about it. This isn't jealousy. It's fury at seeing power slip from Roman hands, specifically her own. Meanwhile in Rome, Octavian isn't idle. He fills the streets with promises: land for veterans, peace for citizens, order for the Senate. You wander past the rostra in your mind's eye and hear his voice steady and calm, an unsettling contrast to Antony's bombast. He mints coins too, stamped with his youthful face and the reassurance that Rome belongs to him. It's a subtle propaganda war, and Fulvia knows how dangerous subtlety can be. In Athens, you watch her surrounded by loyal clients, people who owe their fortunes to her cunning. They press her for guidance. Will there be another march on Rome, another battle? She smiles faintly, as if she knows the answer but won't share it yet. Mainstream fact: around this time, Antony and Octavian officially patch things up, on paper at least, forming the second triumvirate with Lepidus. But while men toast their fragile alliance, Fulvia knows better than to trust ink on a treaty. Her health begins to falter. You see it in her pale cheeks as she walks marble colonnades in the Greek sun, in the way her voice occasionally softens to a whisper. She's worn down by years of struggle, by nights plodding over maps lit only by flickering oil lamps. Yet even as her body weakens, her resolve hardens. She writes to friends in Rome, urging them not to let Octavian tighten his grip unopposed. Historians debate whether these letters were pleas or commands, but given Fulvia's style, you can guess which. As you wander the Agora in Athens, past statues chipped by time, you sense how out of place she feels here. Rome is her stage, not these quiet Greek streets. Still, she keeps moving, arranging Antony's affairs, preparing ships, gathering funds. If she feels Cleopatra's shadow stretching westward, she doesn't say so aloud. But you notice her glance east whenever a merchant ship arrives, eyes narrowing at every rumor of Egyptian feasts and golden barges. Then comes the fever. One evening, as the cicadas drone and the Aegean breeze drifts through her chamber, Fulvia collapses. You see Antony rush in too late, her ambitious fire guttering like a torch in the wind. There are no mobs to rally now, no Senate to face down, just whispered prayers and damp cloths on her brow. Quirky tidbit: Roman doctors at the time sometimes prescribed crushed emerald mixed in wine for fevers. Whether Fulvia drank it or not, you can almost taste the metallic tang as attendants fumble for remedies. She dies far from Rome, without the marble pomp she deserves. Antony weeps, or at least he claims to, but you wonder if part of him feels relief. A partner as forceful as Fulvia could never truly be put aside, and her death clears a political path just as surely as a battle one. Yet her presence lingers. You can feel it as you pass through marketplaces where people still talk of her boldness, or in the glint of coins once stamped under her watch. Even Octavian, consolidating power, must acknowledge her absence with a wary respect. Fulvia is gone, but the alliances she forged, the veterans she paid, the enemies she made, those remain, shaping the Roman world Antony and Octavian will soon fight to control. You're still standing on the sun-bleached quays of Greece, but the air has changed. The salt wind no longer carries Fulvia's sharp voice or urgent plans. She's gone now, carried off by fever, and yet you feel her ghost lingering like a stubborn perfume in Antony's camp. When Antony receives word of her death, you watch his expression shift, not just grief, not just guilt, but calculation. Without Fulvia steering his political fortunes in Rome, Antony is free to follow his own whims, and one particularly glittering whim waits in Alexandria. You imagine the muffled shuffle of sandals on marble as he turns away from Italy and heads toward Cleopatra's perfumed court. But back in Rome, Octavian knows how to spin a story. He doesn't waste a breath blaming Antony for abandoning his wife. He blames Fulvia instead, calling her the spark that ignited civil war, the meddling wife who dared to lead troops and stir riots. You walk past the rostra and hear his voice soothing the crowd. Rome is peaceful now, because that troublesome woman is gone. Historians still argue whether Octavian genuinely feared Fulvia's ambition or simply found her a convenient scapegoat. Meanwhile, Fulvia's name doesn't vanish so easily. In the smoky taverns of Perusia, veterans still murmur about how she secured their pay. Some even say her face should have been on the coins right beside Antony's, a rumor you trace through markets where denarii pass from hand to hand, silver glinting like moonlight on water. Quirky tidbit. At least one ancient source claims her likeness did appear on provincial coinage, though no specimen survives to prove it. You hold an imaginary coin to the light and wonder if her sharp features once stared back at a world that pretended women had no power. As Antony and Octavian briefly reconcile, you wander through camps where soldiers clean their armor, uneasy. They don't know which master to serve, but they remember who filled their purses. Even in death, Fulvia's influence keeps Antony's supporters loyal a little longer. You can almost hear them say, "She fought for us when no one else would." The streets of Rome, though, have a short memory when it's convenient. Senators who once bowed to her schemes now shake their heads as though she were just a foolish wife who didn't know her place. You stroll past basilicas where marble inscriptions praise men who started bigger wars than she ever did, and you notice the double standard carved as clearly as any Latin epitaph. Antony, freed of his Roman wife, drifts eastward into Cleopatra's embrace, leaving Octavian to consolidate Italy unopposed. You sense Fulvia's frustration even beyond the grave. This isn't what she bled for. She wanted Antony's power secure in Rome, not squandered on Egyptian feasts and exotic pageantry. If you close your eyes, you can almost picture her ghost standing on the banks of the Tiber, arms crossed, glaring east. Mainstream fact: the fragile peace between Antony and Octavian, sealed after Fulvia's death, sets the stage for the division of the Roman world at Brundisium. You wander through that treaty port, smelling tar from freshly caulked ships, hearing Latin commands barked over the splash of oars. Fulvia's name comes up in whispers even here, as a warning. This is what happens when women meddle too far, some say. Others murmur, if Antony had listened to her instead of Octavian, Rome might already belong to him. Her enemies in Rome try to erase her, but her story refuses to stay buried. Clients she once aided still light lamps in her honor. Women in the Subura district tell tales about the senator's wife who wouldn't stay silent, their voices low but admiring. Historians debate whether these stories are myth or memory, but as you drift past insulae crowded with life, you hear them all the same. Fulvia as heroine, Fulvia as villain, Fulvia as both at once. And then there's the strangest legacy of all. Years later, when Antony and Octavian finally clash in the last great struggle of the Republic, soldiers will still remember her. In the camps before Actium, grizzled veterans speak her name with respect, even when they curse Antony's choices. She is the reminder that politics isn't just marble and oratory, it's blood, coin, and nerve. You trace her shadow through Rome's winding streets, where graffiti once praised her dead husband Clodius and now quietly praises her. You feel the weight of her decisions in every triumphal arch Octavian builds for himself, monuments erected over the bones of those who dared oppose him. Fulvia didn't live to see Octavian become Augustus, but you know he learned something from her: how to turn personal ambition into imperial destiny without ever admitting its ambition at all. As you linger near the Forum at twilight, the air cooling, torches flickering, you realize Fulvia's story isn't finished. Her boldness planted seeds that outlast her, seeds of resistance, of fear, of grudging respect. And though Octavian may claim victory, you sense that every time he mints a coin with his face alone, he's really celebrating that no woman's shadow shares the silver anymore. You're still walking Rome's marble streets, but now they feel quieter. Fulvia is long gone, yet her name lingers like the faint ring of a bell after it's struck. The Forum hums with Octavian's carefully staged calm, and Antony, far to the east with Cleopatra, has traded Roman grit for Alexandrian splendor. You can almost hear Fulvia scoff at the thought. her husband lounging on a golden barge while Rome itself slips through his fingers. Octavian has perfected the art of memory management. Every speech, every coin, every law paints Antony as reckless and Fulvia as the woman who nearly burned Italy to the ground. You wander past a fresh statue in the Campus Martius, its inscription praising peace restored, and you know whose reputation is being buried under those neat letters. Historians still argue whether Octavian truly believed Fulvia was the mastermind behind the Perusian War, or whether blaming her was simply too convenient to resist. Yet even as Octavian scrubs her name from official praise, the streets remember. In taverns thick with smoke and garlic, veterans mutter about the woman who fought for their pay when no one else would. You overhear market sellers in the Subura telling stories of Fulvia's sharp tongue and sharper mind, passing her memory along like gossip wrapped in fig leaves. Quirky tidbit. Some later Roman writers claimed she owned an entire workshop of mirror polishers, not for vanity, but to make sure every senator who crossed her saw exactly how pale fear made his face. As Antony's power wanes and Octavian edges closer to sole rule, you feel Fulvia's absence like a gap in the paving stones. Would Antony have fared better if she were still alive to whip his allies into shape? Would Octavian's rise have been slower if she'd been in Rome, bargaining with veterans and intimidating rivals in person? No one knows. Even now, historians debate whether she was Antony's loyal partner or an independent operator using his name as cover. You step past rows of scroll sellers and overhear scraps of every version. Fulvia the schemer, Fulvia the patriot, Fulvia the woman who wanted Rome to treat her like a man. Mainstream fact. When Octavian finally defeats Antony and Cleopatra at Actium in 31 BCE, he sets the stage for the Roman Republic's death and the birth of the empire. But Fulvia isn't there to see it. Her fight ended a decade too soon, leaving behind only the memory of a woman who refused to sit still while the Republic crumbled. You can picture her ghost stalking through Antony's empty villa, eyeing the Egyptian silks and half-drained amphorae of wine with contempt. If she had survived, she might have forced Antony to stay in Italy, to face Octavian directly, to hold the loyalty of the legions instead of squandering it on Eastern luxuries. She might even have been the first to understand that Octavian wasn't just another rival politician. He was building something bigger, something permanent. As you wander through the Forum one last time, the marble glowing gold in the late sun, you notice how carefully Octavian has arranged everything. Monuments rise in perfect order, temples gleam with fresh paint, and every inscription praises him alone. No mention of Fulvia, yet she's still there in the shadows, a reminder that Rome's power struggles were never just between men. Her ambition, sharp and unyielding, showed that a Roman woman could play the game even when the rules swore she couldn't. You pause beside a fountain, listening to the trickle of water. The crowds move past you, senators in togas, slaves balancing baskets of fruit, merchants arguing over coin weight. Somewhere, someone is still telling a story about Fulvia, though the details are already blurring. Was she a hero, a villain? Both. Rome, as always, decides its truth after the fact. And now the sun is sinking, shadows stretching long across the stones. You've walked with Fulvia from Clodius to Curio to Antony, through riots, marriages, coins, and war. You've seen her rise and fall, and you've seen how even death can't quite silence her. Rome moves on, but her footsteps echo if you know how to listen.